She bought the rusted 1968 Dodge Charger for a fraction of the cost, thinking it was just another abandoned project. But as she began the painstaking process of restoring it, she unearthed a secret that would shake her to the core. What was hidden under the seat was more than just old tools. It was a relic that would change her life forever. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if you love stories of unexpected discoveries, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode will blow your mind. Let's get started. Emma Turner wiped the sweat from her brow as she stood in front of the old Dodge Charger, its faded blue paint barely visible beneath layers of dust and rust. The car was sitting there, abandoned, at an estate sale in the outskirts of town, looking as if it hadn't moved in years. It wasn't much to look at, just a shell of its former self, but something about it spoke to Emma. She wasn't sure if it was the shape of the body, the way the front fenders had just enough curve to remind her of the classics, or if it was the faint hum of a forgotten dream, still echoing through the worn chassis. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Emma had always had a soft spot for cars that others deemed junk. It was as if they had stories to tell, stories that only someone willing to get their hands dirty could hear. She had worked in her father's garage since she was a little girl, learning the ins and outs of engines, tuning carburetors, and fixing everything from broken transmissions to bent fenders. There wasn't much that Emma couldn't do with a wrench and a bit of elbow grease, but a 1968 Charger? That was something different, something special. And it was sitting right in front of her, just waiting for someone to bring it back to life. She glanced at the price tag. $1,200. A steal for a classic car in this condition. She didn't have that kind of money, but she also knew that this car was meant for her. She could see the potential not just in the car, but in the challenge. This wasn't just about fixing a vehicle. This was about restoring something that had been forgotten, something that needed a second chance. Emma took a deep breath and walked up to the seller, a middle-aged man with a disheveled beard and a look of indifference. "I'll take it," she said, surprising herself with the sudden surge of confidence. The man raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "You sure?" he asked, his voice rough and unpolished. Emma nodded, glancing one more time at the Charger. The rust was deep in places, the tires flat, and the interior looked like it had been picked apart by rodents. But that was all surface damage. Underneath, she knew, lay something worth saving. "I'll find a way to get it towed," she said, reaching for her wallet. "I'll take it off your hands." The next morning, Emma stood alone in her garage, the smell of motor oil and gasoline thick in the air. The 1968 Charger was now parked in Bay 2, its presence both overwhelming and exhilarating. Sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, casting a soft glow on the project before her. She grabbed her toolbox and stood for a moment, taking it all in the car that once roared down highways, now silent, forgotten, and waiting for her touch to bring it back to life. She'd always been good with her hands, whether it was fixing a busted radiator or tuning up a vintage engine. But this felt different. The car wasn't just a repair job, it was a challenge, a puzzle, and a chance to prove herself. There was something almost sacred about restoring a classic like this, as though she wasn't just fixing metal and rubber, but reviving a piece of history. The first thing Emma tackled was the engine. It was old, filthy, and stiff. Every part seemed to resist her touch. As she pried open the hood and peered inside, the smell of oil and grease hit her hard, and she had to fight the urge to cough. The engine block, coated in years of neglect, stared back at her like a patient waiting to be healed. She twisted the wrench with determination, loosening bolts and removing the first layer of grime. With each turn of the tool, she felt a small victory, the parts coming free, the engine slowly revealing its potential. Then, as she lifted the air filter, a small piece of paper fluttered to the ground. Emma froze. It wasn't a mechanic's note or some random scrap. It was a photograph. Faded and curling at the edges, it was of a man standing next to the Charger, smiling broadly. The photo was worn, but Emma could still make out the distinctive vintage racing stripes that had once marked the car. Curious, she picked it up carefully, wiping off the dirt with the sleeve of her shirt. The man in the photo looked young, maybe in his 20s, wearing a grease-stained t-shirt with a grin that seemed too wide to be real. The background was blurry, but there was something familiar about the scene, as though it was taken in front of a place Emma had seen before, though she couldn't place it. She flipped the photo over and saw a date, scribbled in the corner, 1968. No name, just the year. The photograph seemed to hold a secret, but it wasn't the first thing Emma had uncovered in this car that felt out of place. She tacked the photo up on the tool wall beside her, deciding to keep it in view. Whoever had owned this car had loved it, maybe even cherished it. That much was clear. Emma wondered what had happened to them, why the car had been left to decay in the first place. But the photo wasn't the only thing hiding in the old Charger. As she continued working, something shifted beneath the passenger seat, a small metallic click. Emma's heart skipped a beat. What was it? Slowly, she bent down and peered under the seat, pushing aside layers of dust and debris. Her fingers brushed against something cold and hard. She hesitated for a second, before pulling it free, a small, intricately carved box wrapped in an old leather strap. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just another forgotten piece of junk. This was something meant to be hidden. She felt a sudden sense of urgency, as if the box had been waiting for someone like her to find it. Emma sat back on her heels, looking at the box in her hands. Something about it felt significant. She could hear the hum of the world outside her garage, but for a moment, it was as though time had stopped. The box wasn't just part of the car. It was part of a bigger story, one Emma was now a part of. The mystery had just begun. The box felt heavy in Emma's hands, the worn leather strap cool to the touch. It wasn't much bigger than a cigar box, but the weight suggested something more inside. She hesitated before opening it, as if the box held more than just memories, like it contained the very essence of the car's forgotten past. She sat on the floor of her garage, the car looming over her like a silent sentinel. The afternoon sun slanted through the grimy windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the concrete floor. For a moment, Emma just stared at the box, running her fingers along the leather strap. Whatever this was, it had been hidden for a reason. And now, it was hers to uncover. Finally, with a deep breath, Emma untied the strap and opened the box. Inside, there were no treasures, no jewels or artifacts. But there was something much more valuable. A small stack of old letters, a few photographs, and a worn key, tarnished with age. Emma gently picked up the first photograph. It was a black and white picture, yellowing at the edges, but still vivid in its detail. The image showed a young man, no more than 25, standing next to the Charger. His hair was dark, windswept, and he wore a faded leather jacket. He had the same grin as the man in the first photo she found, but this one was different. It wasn't just a snapshot of a happy moment, it was personal. Intimate even. In the background, she saw what looked like a mechanic's garage, the same kind Emma had worked in with her father. She held the photo up to the light, the familiarity of it striking her once again. There was something in the setting, the worn-out garage, that reminded her of her father's old shop. She couldn't explain why, but she felt an undeniable connection to the person in the photo, even though she had no idea who he was. Next, Emma picked up the letters. They were written on old, yellowed paper with uneven handwriting. The first letter was addressed to someone named Jack, and it was filled with details about the car's history. It described how Jack had bought the Charger in 1968, the summer after he returned from Vietnam, and how he had poured every bit of himself into restoring it with his father. The letter spoke of dreams, of freedom on the open road, and of the bond between father and son that the car symbolized. But the final letter was different. It was shorter, written with a sense of urgency, and the handwriting was barely legible. It was dated a few months before the car had been abandoned. "Jack, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. The Charger, the memories, they're too much. You'll understand. I have to leave before I drag you down with me. Please forgive me. I'm sorry I couldn't make it right." Emma's heart sank. The words on the page felt like a secret that had been buried for years, and now she was uncovering them piece by piece. The car, once a symbol of freedom and hope, had been abandoned not just by time, but by the person who had once loved it most. But who was Jack? And why had he left everything behind, including the charger? Emma had a sinking feeling that these letters were just the beginning. There was more to this story, and she needed to know the truth. As she sifted through the letters, she noticed something hidden underneath the stack. A small, folded piece of paper. It was old and fragile, the edges curling from years of neglect. She unfolded it carefully, her fingers trembling. It was a map, hand-drawn with a location marked in red ink. A chill ran down Emma's spine. This wasn't just a map to an old garage or a forgotten location. It was a clue, the answer to the mystery that was unfolding before her. She tucked the map into her pocket, stood up, and turned back toward the charger. The car now seemed different to her, not just a project to restore, but a key to a past she had yet to understand. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about finding out what happened to Jack and why the charger had been abandoned in the first place. Emma sat at her workbench, the soft hum of her garage the only sound around her. She could hear the old charger's engine parts scattered across the floor, some pieces still covered in grease, others rusted beyond recognition. But in her hands, the map was heavy, its meaning unclear, yet it pulled at her curiosity with an undeniable force. She knew it had to lead somewhere important, somewhere hidden, and it was meant for her to find. The map, drawn in jagged lines and smudged ink, had a few locations marked, but the one that stood out was a small cabin in the woods just outside town. Emma had heard of it, a place that locals spoke of, only in whispers. A crumbling structure no one dared touch. It wasn't a place that invited visitors, and it wasn't a place Emma would have thought to seek out for a simple restoration project. She folded the map carefully and tucked it into her jacket pocket. She needed to see it for herself. The next morning, she gathered her things, gloves, flashlight, and a wrench in case she needed it, and drove her old truck toward the edge of town. The road leading to the cabin was narrow, lined with thick woods that seemed to swallow up the light. Emma's heart raced as she drove deeper, the rumble of the engine a steady reminder of her nerves. When she finally arrived, the cabin stood in front of her like a forgotten relic. It was barely standing a shell of a home, its wooden frame sagging in places, windows boarded up, and vines creeping up the sides. But something about it felt familiar. She parked her truck nearby and stepped out, the air thick with the scent of moss and decay. The moment her boots hit the dirt, Emma felt a chill creep up her spine. She hadn't been here before, but it felt like she had, like this place had been waiting for her to find it. She moved slowly, carefully making her way toward the front door. It was half open, the hinges creaking in protest. As she stepped inside, the darkness swallowed her whole. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old wood and dust. She pulled out her flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. The floor creaked underfoot as she made her way deeper into the cabin. On the far side of the room, against the wall, Emma noticed something, an old wooden chest, its edges chipped and faded from years of neglect. There was no way she could have missed it before, but somehow, it had remained hidden in the shadow of the room. Her pulse quickened. This was it. She wasn't sure why, but she was certain the chest held the key to everything. The truth that had been locked away. Emma knelt beside it, her fingers trembling as she worked to pry open the rusty latch. With a creak, the chest came open, revealing its contents. Inside were a collection of old belongings, some clearly worn and forgotten. But as Emma sifted through them, she found a small, weathered box the same size as the one she'd found in the charger. The leather was soft and cracked, as though it had been handled often in the past. She opened it carefully, knowing that whatever was inside would lead her closer to the answers she was searching for. And there it was. A set of keys, one of which looked incredibly familiar. It was the same key she had found in the charger's glove box, the same one she'd felt drawn to. She held it up to the light, her heart racing. There was no mistaking it now. The key, the map, and the hidden messages were all connected. But to what and why? She took a deep breath and closed the box. The mystery was deepening, and Emma knew she had only scratched the surface. This wasn't just about restoring a car anymore. It was about uncovering a secret that someone, somewhere, had tried to bury for a very long time. As she stood up, Emma glanced around the cabin once more, the realization dawning on her that her search was far from over. She had found the key, but the real question was, what was she supposed to unlock with it? Emma returned to the garage that evening, the weight of the small, tarnished key in her pocket heavy against her side. The cabin had left her feeling unsettled, but it also deepened her sense of urgency. Whoever had hidden these clues knew something. Emma wasn't sure she was ready to uncover, but it had been thrust upon her. There was no turning back now. She locked the door behind her and set the box with the keys on the workbench beside the charger. The silence in the garage felt different now, as though the car was waiting for her to make the next move. The photo, the letters, the key, they were all connected. But how? Emma's fingers brushed the key again, its cold surface reminding her of the puzzle she had yet to solve. She stared at it, feeling an odd connection, but also the unmistakable pull of something bigger, something beyond the car. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it into the ignition of the charger. She turned it, but the engine didn't start. Of course it wouldn't. But there was something oddly comforting about the sound of the key turning, as if it were the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand. She exhaled, a sigh filled with equal parts frustration and anticipation. Emma had always prided herself on her ability to solve problems, to put things back together, but this wasn't like anything she had ever encountered. She wasn't just fixing a car. She was piecing together a life, a legacy, and maybe even a piece of herself. Her eyes fell on the pile of documents Jackson had left behind, and she decided to take another look at them. The faint smell of mildew lingered in the air as she sifted through the old papers. One letter in particular caught her attention. It was a personal letter, dated a few months after the last one she had read. It was addressed to someone named Rebecca. Rebecca, I can't keep doing this. I know what I said about the car, about finishing it, but something's not right. It feels like the car is pulling me back, holding me hostage. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep pretending. I need to leave. Please understand. It's not you. It's not the car. It's me. The letter was brief, but it struck Emma hard. The emotion was raw, filled with guilt and sorrow. Jackson had clearly struggled with something. Was it the war? The memories? Or had the car truly haunted him? The name Rebecca lingered in her mind as she set the letter aside. Another thread in the tangled web of this story. Who was she? Why had Jackson left her behind, just as he had left the charger? Emma leaned back in her chair and ran a hand through her hair, frustrated. She needed answers, and she was beginning to realize that they weren't going to be found in the car alone. They were somewhere else in the people connected to it, in the places they had left behind. Her thoughts drifted to the key again, still sitting on the workbench, waiting to be used. There had to be more to this key, more than just unlocking the ignition of an old charger. She grabbed the key, determined. There had to be something in Jackson's past that tied everything together. He had clearly wanted to leave something behind, something personal. Maybe it wasn't just about the car. Maybe the car had been his way of holding on to a memory, to a future that could have been. With a renewed sense of purpose, Emma picked up the map again. She traced the path with her finger, focusing on the location where it had led her earlier, the cabin. But this time, something else caught her eye. A small note written in the corner of the map in almost faded ink. The key unlocks more than you think. Go to the old diner. Ask for Rebecca. Oh, Emma's heart skipped a beat. Rebecca. The name had surfaced again, and this time, it was a person she could find. She stood up, the decision clear. There was only one place to go now, and it wasn't the car. It was time to meet Rebecca, and maybe, just maybe, she would unlock the final piece of this mystery. The diner sat on the outskirts of town, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the early evening light. The building was worn, its windows fogged with years of greasy air, and time that had slowly passed it by. The exterior was a patchwork of cracked bricks, peeling paint, and rusted signs, but inside, there was a warmth that Emma hadn't expected. The low hum of conversation, the clink of silverware on porcelain, and the scent of sizzling bacon all wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. Emma stood in the doorway for a moment, her hand resting on the handle. Her heart pounded in her chest, an anxious knot forming in her stomach. She wasn't sure what she expected to find here, but it felt like something important was about to unfold. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the bell above the door ringing with a soft chime. The inside of the diner was cozy, dimly lit, and smelled of coffee and old wood. A few people sat scattered around the booths, sipping coffee and talking quietly. At the counter, a woman with graying hair and a red apron was wiping down the counter, humming to herself. Emma approached cautiously, her footsteps almost muffled by the worn linoleum floor. The woman looked up and smiled politely, her eyes warm but tired. "Can I help you, hon?" she asked, her voice gravelly but kind. "I'm looking for someone named Rebecca," Emma said, her voice steady despite the nervous energy surging through her. "Rebecca? Hawk?" The woman paused, her hand stilling on the rag. A flicker of recognition passed through her eyes, but it was quickly masked by a soft sigh. She set the rag down and leaned against the counter, folding her arms as she studied Emma closely. "Why are you looking for Rebecca?" the woman asked, her voice more cautious now. Emma hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to say. She didn't want to seem like she was prying, but at the same time, she knew this was the key to everything. Without Rebecca, there was no way to finish the story Jackson's story, the story of the Charger. "I've been working on a project," Emma explained slowly. "It's a car, a 1968 Dodge Charger. I think it belonged to her father, maybe? A man named Jackson Hawk." The woman's face softened, and she let out a long breath. "Jackson's car, huh?" she murmured, more to herself than to Emma. "You sure you want to get involved with that mess, girl?" Emma nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I don't know what happened, but I need to understand it. I found a map, and it led me here. I have to know who Rebecca is and why her father left the car behind." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, and she sighed again, as if she were weighing whether or not to share this information. After a moment, she pushed herself off the counter and gestured for Emma to follow her. Emma complied, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. They passed a few booths and walked toward the back of the diner, where a small door led to a storage room. The woman knocked softly before opening it, revealing a small office that smelled of old paper and dust. On the far wall was a faded photograph of a man standing beside a car, a Charger, Jackson Hawk. The woman sat down behind a desk, motioning for Emma to take a seat in the chair opposite her. "My name's Clara, by the way. I used to know Jackson. A long time ago," she said, her voice softening with nostalgia. "Rebecca, she's his daughter. But she hasn't been the same since he disappeared. She was just a kid when he left a mess of heartache and confusion. The last thing she wanted was for anyone to mess with his memory." Clara paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. "But I think you might be the one to finally bring it all to light. I don't know what's hidden in that car of yours, but I can tell it's more than just metal and rust. And Rebecca needs to know the truth. If you really want to help, I'll take you to her." Emma's heart raced. This was it. Rebecca was real, and she was the key to unraveling everything. Clara stood up and grabbed her jacket, motioning for Emma to follow. "Come on, girl. Time's wasting." The drive to Rebecca's house was quiet, the kind of silence that hung between strangers who didn't yet know each other, but could sense the weight of the story about to unfold. Clara's old truck rumbled along the narrow road, the trees on either side forming a green tunnel that seemed to grow darker with every mile. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap, her mind racing with questions. Rebecca Hawk, the name echoed in her thoughts, like a drumbeat, a mystery that was now within reach. The photographs, the map, the box hidden under the Charger's seat, they all led her here. But what was it about Rebecca that held the key? What was the connection between her father, the car, and the hidden legacy that had been locked away all these years? Clara glanced over at Emma, her weathered eyes full of understanding. "Rebecca's a tough one. She's not like her father. Not like she used to be, anyway. Life's been hard on her, and I can't say I blame her. But Jackson, he loved her. That car was his way of holding on to something, and now, I think it's your turn to finish what he started. Emma nodded, though she didn't fully understand what Clara meant. She had her own reasons for wanting to restore the charger, but this was becoming something much bigger. This wasn't just about fixing a car anymore. It was about healing something deeper, a connection that spanned generations. The truck slowed as they approached a small, dilapidated house at the end of a gravel road. The yard was overgrown with weeds, the paint peeling from the walls. It looked abandoned, yet Emma could feel the presence of something alive within it, something waiting to be discovered. Clara stopped the truck and turned to Emma. "You ready?" she asked, her voice soft but resolute. Emma nodded, trying to steady her breath. "I have to be." Clara led the way to the front door, her boots crunching on the dry earth. She knocked twice, the sound echoing in the still air. The door creaked open, revealing a woman who looked to be in her early 30s. Her long hair was tangled and unkempt, and her eyes, when they met Emma's, were filled with an old, deep sorrow. Rebecca Hawke. For a moment, neither woman said anything. The silence stretched out, thick with unspoken words. Clara cleared her throat. "Rebecca, this is Emma Turner. She's been working on your father's car." Rebecca's gaze flickered to Emma, and there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't anger. It was something else entirely, a kind of guarded curiosity, like someone who had been running from the past for too long and wasn't sure if they were ready to face it again. "I don't need anyone fixing his stuff," Rebecca said quietly, her voice rough from years of disuse. "Not the car. Not the memories. Not anything." Emma took a step forward, her voice steady. "I don't think you need me to fix it. I think it's time we both find out what it really means." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, and for a long moment, Emma thought she might slam the door in her face. But instead, Rebecca stepped aside, allowing them both inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with old furniture and boxes, but there was a certain quiet warmth to it. A stack of old books sat on a table next to a dusty armchair, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and something else Emma couldn't quite place: grief, maybe, or hope. Rebecca didn't sit down. She stood in the doorway watching them both. "Why are you here, Emma? What do you want with a car that's been rotting for 20 years? Emma hesitated. She hadn't planned on saying this, but the words came out anyway, raw and honest. "I think it's more than just a car. I think it's part of your father's story, part of his legacy, and I think it's time someone finished what he started." Rebecca's eyes softened, just a little, but there was still a wall between them. "You don't understand," she whispered. "My father. He was gone long before he ever left that car behind. The charger was his way of keeping something alive. But when he left, it broke everything." Emma's heart twisted. She knew something about broken things, about things left unfinished. The Mustang she had restored, her father's garage that she'd inherited, even her own broken heart. It was all about finding a way to piece things back together. "I understand more than you think," Emma said softly, stepping closer to Rebecca. "I know what it's like to be left with something that's broken, but that doesn't mean it's over." Rebecca's gaze dropped to the floor, her voice trembling. "I never wanted that car. I wanted my father back. But I couldn't have him, so I ran. I left everything behind." Emma reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the key, the one that had started it all. She held it out to Rebecca, offering it like a bridge between the past and the present. "Maybe this is the key to understanding him, and maybe it's the key to understanding you too." Rebecca's fingers brushed the key, and for a brief second, Emma saw something in her eyes, not just pain, but the flicker of something else. Hope, or maybe acceptance. She took the key in her hand, holding it tightly. "Let's find out together," Emma said gently. The air in the room seemed to thicken as Rebecca closed her fingers around the key. It was a simple object, tarnished and old, but in that moment, it felt like the weight of 100 memories, each one tied to the past Rebecca had tried to leave behind. She stood there, holding it in her palm, her eyes distant. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the ceiling fan above them and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Emma waited, not sure what to say, but knowing this was a pivotal moment. She could feel the tension hanging between them, but she also sensed the shift, the quiet acceptance that Rebecca might be ready to confront the past, the car, her father, the legacy. Rebecca slowly turned the key over in her hand, her eyes tracing the worn edges, her breath shallow. "I didn't want to face this," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I didn't want to remember what that car meant. To him, to me." Emma took a careful step forward, her voice steady. "You don't have to face it alone. I'm here. Let's do this together." Rebecca glanced at her, her expression conflicted, but the hardness in her eyes seemed to soften, just a little. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, Emma saw the weight of years of grief and regret in her eyes. I guess it's time." She led Emma outside to her truck, the two of them walking in silence. The Charger waited for them, parked just as Emma had left it in the garage. Rebecca stopped at the driver's side door, running her fingers along the doorframe. The car seemed almost alive now, no longer just a relic, but a piece of history waiting to be rediscovered. Emma handed Rebecca the key. "You ready?" Rebecca hesitated, but only for a second, before slipping the key into the ignition. There was a faint click, then a groan as the engine turned over, sluggish, but alive. The sound echoed through the air, and for a moment, it felt like the world stood still. The Charger had come back to life, and in that instant, so had something else. Something long buried. Rebecca let out a shaky breath and turned off the engine. She stepped out of the car and stood there, looking at it for a long time, her back straight as if she was bracing for a storm. Then, slowly, she walked toward the trunk and opened it, revealing a set of old, faded documents, a box wrapped in leather, and a stack of photographs. "This was his," Rebecca said quietly, her fingers grazing the photos. "When he came back from the war, everything changed. He wasn't the same man anymore. The car, it was his way of holding on to something that was still real." Emma stepped closer, feeling the weight of the past in the air. "I don't think he ever stopped loving you." Rebecca's eyes softened, and for the first time, Emma saw a glimpse of the woman she could have been, before the scars of time had left their mark. "I know he did. But I couldn't handle the weight of it. The car, the memories. I ran from it all. From him. From myself." Emma placed a hand on Rebecca's shoulder, offering silent support. "You don't have to run anymore. It's not too late to fix it." Rebecca nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. Maybe it's not. But it's time to let go of the past, to let this car tell its story, not just my father's." Emma watched as Rebecca picked up the leather-wrapped box and opened it carefully. Inside, there was a single letter, folded and worn from years of handling. Rebecca unfolded it slowly, her hands trembling as she read the words aloud. "To my daughter, Rebecca, if you're reading this, it means the Charger has found its way back to you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to finish what I started, but I want you to know that the car was never just about the engine or the metal. It was about building something that would outlast us both. Something that would always remind you that no matter how broken things may seem, they can be rebuilt. Don't let the rust fool you. There's more to this than meets the eye. Take the car, take the key, and find the courage to finish what I couldn't. With all my love, Dad." Rebecca's voice cracked as she finished reading, and Emma could see the deep emotion in her eyes. The past was finally coming to the surface, and the weight of it was almost unbearable. "I don't know if I can do this," Rebecca said softly, holding the letter to her chest. "I don't know if I can fix all the years we lost." Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to do it alone. Let's finish it together." Rebecca's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Emma saw something break through not just the walls Rebecca had built, but the years of anger, sadness, and loss. It wasn't a full smile, but it was the beginning of something new, something hopeful. Together, they would restore not just the car, but the connection between a father and daughter, and the legacy that had been waiting to be healed. The sun had long since set when Emma and Rebecca returned to the garage, the soft hum of the night surrounding them as they stood before the charger. The silence between them had shifted, no longer filled with unease, but with a shared purpose, a new understanding. Rebecca stood beside the car, her fingers brushing over the body, tracing the lines of the hood as though she was seeing it for the first time. For so long, the charger had been a symbol of something broken, a piece of her past she had tried to bury. But now, with the key in her hand and the letter from her father still close, she realized that it wasn't just the car that needed fixing. It was her. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Emma worked silently beside her, offering quiet assistance when needed, but for the most part, Rebecca took the lead. She wasn't just restoring a car, she was reclaiming her story. Each bolt tightened, each layer of rust scraped away, felt like peeling back the layers of time, of loss, and of forgiveness. They spent hours in the garage, working in a rhythm that felt natural. The music of wrenching, screwing, and turning parts together filled the space. But the real work wasn't just mechanical, it was emotional. The air between them seemed to shift with every task, every shared glance. They weren't just fixing a car, they were fixing each other. Rebecca stood back, wiping sweat from her brow, taking a breath as she looked at the now gleaming body of the charger. It was almost done. The work they had started together had brought it back to life. But it wasn't just the car that had changed. It was the way Rebecca stood. Stronger, surer, more connected to the past than she had ever been before. She turned to Emma, a quiet gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for pushing me. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to face it, but I'm glad I did." Emma smiled back, a small, knowing smile. "It wasn't just me. You did the hard part." Rebecca's gaze fell back to the charger. I think Dad would be proud, but I don't know what happens next. The car's done. What about me?" Emma stepped closer, her voice steady but warm. "You're not done. This is just the beginning. You've been running from the past for too long, but now you're ready to face it." Rebecca nodded, a tear escaping her eye. But this time, it wasn't one of sorrow. It was the release she had needed. The grief and guilt that had held her captive for years finally started to fade, replaced by something new. Hope. Hope that it was possible to heal, to move forward. Together, they closed the hood of the charger, the engine now humming with life, as if it were alive again. Emma stepped back and looked at the car, nodding in approval. "It's yours now, completely." Rebecca hesitated for a moment before opening the door and sliding into the driver's seat. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the smooth leather beneath her fingers, the weight of the steering wheel in her hands. She started the engine, and the soft roar filled the air. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt a sense of peace. The car wasn't just a vehicle. It was a bridge, a connection to her father, to the past, and now, to a future she could finally embrace. She looked over at Emma, who was watching her with quiet pride. "I'm ready," Rebecca said softly. Emma smiled. "Let's take her for a spin." The engine purred as Rebecca slowly guided the charger out of the garage, the headlights cutting through the dark. Emma followed behind her, the two of them driving down the familiar streets of town, the sound of the engine filling the air like a heartbeat. For Rebecca, it felt as if the car was more than just a machine now. It was a companion, a piece of her father that she could never fully let go of, yet was only now beginning to understand. Every mile they drove felt like a journey into the past, but also into something new, a chance to make things right, a chance to heal. The town passed by in the rearview mirror, and as they drove out toward the open road, Rebecca felt a new sense of freedom. The trees and the fields stretched out on either side, the vastness of the world opening up before her. She wasn't running anymore. She was driving forward, not away from the past, but towards something greater. Emma kept her distance, but there was a quiet understanding between them. She could see the change in Rebecca. The confidence that had been buried beneath years of guilt and grief was finally surfacing. The restoration of the charger had brought Rebecca back to herself, and Emma couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride for what they had done together. Rebecca turned the wheel gently, guiding the car down a dirt road, the tires crunching over gravel. She was going somewhere specific, somewhere only she knew. She wasn't sure why, but it felt right. The Charger had led her this far. And now, it was time to see where it would take her next. After a few minutes, Rebecca pulled the car off to the side of the road and stopped beneath a large oak tree. The moonlight illuminated the area, casting a silvery glow over the landscape. She put the car in park and sat there for a moment, just staring at the open field ahead. "This is where he used to bring me," Rebecca said softly, her voice almost lost in the wind. "Before everything changed. Before he left." Emma nodded, understanding the significance of the place. It was where the past and the present collided, where memories of a father's love could finally be laid to rest. Rebecca opened the door and stepped out of the car, her boots crunching against the ground as she made her way to the front of the Charger. She ran her fingers over the hood, the metal cool beneath her touch. She stood there for a long moment, taking it all in, before she finally spoke again. "I think I'm ready to say goodbye," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "To everything I've been holding on to." Emma joined her by the car, standing beside her in the stillness of the night. "You don't have to say goodbye," Emma said softly. "Not really. It's not about forgetting. It's about moving forward with the things that matter most." Rebecca nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. She smiled softly, turning back to the car, and as she did, she finally let go. She didn't need to hold on to the past anymore. She had restored the car. She had restored herself. The two of them stood there in silence for a moment longer, the only sound the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. Then, with a deep breath, Rebecca slid back into the driver's seat. She turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life once more. With one last look at the moonlit road ahead, she pressed the accelerator, feeling the car respond beneath her hands. This time, it was different. She wasn't just driving toward the future. She was driving with purpose, a new kind of peace. The Charger, once a forgotten relic, was now a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of a second chance. As the car drove off into the night, Emma followed behind, a quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. She had been part of something bigger than herself, and for the first time in a long time, she knew she wasn't alone in this world. There were things worth fixing, things worth saving, and sometimes, all it took was a car, a key, and the courage to drive forward.